Unashamed Unafraid, a show unashamed about sexual addiction recovery and unafraid of coming unto Christ for healing, where we share real recovery stories, learn from experts, and share resources that actually work. So join us in being unashamed and unafraid.
Welcome to Unashamed Unafraid. Head to unashamedunafraid.com to donate and become an outsider. Follow us on social media at Unashamed Unafraid. And like us, rate us, follow us wherever you get your podcasts so we can spread this message to more people. I'm Sam, and I'm here with James.
What's up, Sam?
How are you, man?
Thanks for having me on.
Says one host to another. And we are here with Ryan and Kelce.
The real stars of the show.
The real stars of the show. How are you guys doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks.
So, Ryan and Kelce, we're going to hear your story. We'd love to start with a little context, though. Paint your guys' story into context a little bit and tell us how you ended up here.
I mean, if you listen to this podcast, I don't think it's really that unusual of a story. It was, growing up, in the digital age, I had some friends, and I remember going over to their house and got some exposure to pornography fairly early in my life. And never really considered myself addicted, all throughout my teenage years, never would say I was addicted, but I probably was. And I see the impacts now as I look past. And then, we got married, and then we started realizing how much this addiction is playing into our marriage. And you'll love to hear from Kelsey's side, because for the most part, I kept it a secret from her and really tried my best to hide it as much as I could.
So did you two talk about it before you got married at all?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
In fact, it was the same day that I actually bought my wedding dress. I actually asked him after I bought the wedding dress and was like, do you have an issue with porn? And he's like, I did in the past, but I don't anymore. And it was kind of a little bit of a devastating blow to me, but I prayed about it. And Heavenly Father was still pointing me to, no, this is still a good decision. So just stick with him.
Okay.
So I trusted, and we still got married.
So how was porn talked about in your home that made you take on that meeting to teach us a little bit about what that was like for you?
For me, I do remember I have an older brother that's about actually Ryan's age, and he struggled with porn for a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. And then I actually kind of experimented with it a little bit myself. My parents caught me. It was kind of more just a curiosity. I don't feel like it was ever like an addiction that I had to go back to it. But I always considered myself the good girl growing up. And so, it was something that it was naughty. Like, we don't talk about this, and like slap on the hand and like just bury it. And as long as you don't do it anymore, it's not a problem.
Sure. And how about you?
Yeah, I would say similar issue where in my family, I love them to death.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about issues. It's part of our culture where if there's something bad that's going on, or if there's something we need to fix, or something uncomfortable, vulnerable, we talk about it very briefly at the dinner table. And then as soon as we can escape that conversation, we do. We make jokes, we lie to, and it's still something we're working on today. I mean, going through this recovery process, I see it so clearly now how it was so hard to communicate, because it was avoid the vulnerable and hard conversations, because in my idea, it was if you're not talking about it, then it's not a problem. Meaning it, we don't need to address anything. And as long as we keep small talk is present, then that means there's no problems existing. And so that was so easy to just fall into that very surface level conversation all the time.
So Ryan, how did that communication pattern, that way of handling this topic play into the way that your addiction formed and how you dealt with that as a teenager? What was it like growing up?
I mean, growing up, I had a friend who, lost his father. And so his home, he was going through some hard times. And I remember, his being raised by a single mother, but we would always go hang out with that friend. And he had slightly different, religious beliefs than we did. And so his rules were a lot looser. And he'd get these magazines, like just regular dirt biking magazines, but there's always that ad that's provocative, and he'd point him out and be like, hey, do you see this one? And I remember seeing it. It was a very young age, maybe like 10, 11. And then, not surprisingly, his house was the house that we first experienced, digital porn. And when eventually, our family got a computer and, the internet, and it became something that we didn't even have cable TV. So like if I wanted to watch anything fun, anything else besides your basic television, we always had to go to friends' houses. So I remember, having experienced a little bit of that at that house and then going back home and, having those feelings, I didn't know where to find it. And so I remember staying up late and just browsing basic normal television. If you stay up past like 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock, every once in a while you'll get a snippet of a commercial that's slightly more provocative. I remember already shaping that behavior of doing that because I didn't know where to find it myself. And then eventually got the computer and we found it. And once again, I remember telling myself I was never addicted because I always defined addiction by frequency. You're only addicted if you do it every once a week, or if you do it every day, if you do it multiple times a day. Those goalposts kept changing because it's so easy to be in that denial and move those goalposts and put yourself just right outside of addiction and just see it as, oh, this is just something I shouldn't be doing, but I just happen to do it every once in a while. And it was like that for a lot of my teen years. And eventually, I once I grew up, I served an LDS mission, and it was an issue then, and even a year or two afterwards it wasn't, but then it started to creep its way back into my life. And I remember Kelce mentioned that conversation of asking me if I struggled with porn. At that time, I believed what I was saying, that I said, no, I don't.
Yeah.
But when I look back, yes, I did. Because
Right.
it wasn't about the frequency. It was about that urge that I kept returning to and not knowing how to deal with my emotions. And so I would get these urges at times of stress or being tired or, angry, whatever it was. And I remember dreading those conversations. When she brought that up, I was worried that would happen. But at the same time, I'd practiced very much throughout my life just to, know what the person wants to hear and then shape the conversation to get there.
Wow.
Ryan, I connect with a lot of what your experience was growing up, of like, yeah, we're not going to talk about the hard things, addiction. I also was like, oh, it's frequency, it's like, it makes you non-functional essentially. And then like, yeah, I'll just kind of say like what you need to hear is like, no, it's not a big deal. I think we can overcome. Like, so I just connect with so much what you're saying. I'm like, sounds like we had a very similar experience.
And when you're able to go several, weeks or months at a
Right,
time without
right.
doing it, you're like, I'm not addicted. Look, it's been like 3 months since I've done anything.
Totally.
Or it's not to the degree that you hear of other people's, or, the level of porn, softcore or anything else is so much less. I'm watching basic television here, and they wouldn't do, this is stuff that you can still see on basic TV, so therefore it's not porn. But of course it's a gateway. And of course, any addiction is progressive. And it led to a very progressive level in our marriage, which unfortunately got to the point where I couldn't deny I was addicted.
So tell us about that process. It sounds like there was some disclosure right before you got your wedding dress. That was very difficult for you at the time, Kelce. And then you guys decided to get married. How did this kind of take off for you?
The first couple of years of marriage, I would say it really wasn't what I believe an issue. I was in the honeymoon stage and, found different ways to cope with it. But when we started getting near the birth of my son, that's when the feelings of stress started to pile on. That's when the feelings of inadequacy. That's when there's things in my life that I would treat, that I would see how I viewed myself. And, I'm a marketer, so I'm constantly thinking about brand image, awareness, and how you're portrayed in front of other people. And so I'm just constantly calculating, what do others think of me? What do I think? And is there cognitive dissonance there of what I think of myself versus what the image I try to portray? And throughout the first couple of years of marriage, it was bliss. But at the same time, I started getting more and more of that, I don't deserve her. The problem with marrying up in a marriage is you're always striving to become better for your wife. And after a while, like if you constantly have that mentality, like it starts really beating up your self-esteem and you start justifying things because you already see yourself as not deserving.
That's just such a good point of like, if you enter the marriage thinking that she's already in a one-up, that's a problem. That's what I'm hearing you say. You got to let yourself be on equal footing with your partner.
Absolutely. I would hide things, we would talk, but we would talk such surface level. I wouldn't tell her my thoughts, my impressions, my feelings of times that I'm, having angry or frustrated thoughts, or when I, was petty. We didn't really fight for the first
We
5
did it, and we
years.
always would pride ourselves of like, oh, we never have any arguments. Like, we're such a great couple. And I'm a speech therapist is my profession, and I always like prided myself in the fact that I'm like, oh, well, I'm the communication expert. I teach people how to communicate. I was a terrible communicator, and I'm still learning how to be a better communicator in my marriage. But yeah, looking back, those are just thoughts that I have now.
So I wanted to dig into one thing you just said, Ryan, and then we can touch on some of the. I'd love to hear more about this communication and how that played into the dynamic you guys experienced. But Ryan, just as I'm someone who I'm kind of in the thick of that right now, I experience a lot of feelings of unworthiness, and there's a lot of pain that comes from that. There's a lot of shame, and that's one of the triggers that tends to push me back in to addiction. I'm curious. You've mentioned like that was a big issue for you. What have you done to deal with that, just individually and in your relationship with your wife? Because that seems to be, and I hear a lot of guys talk about this too. They're like, yeah, I don't feel worthy of love. I'm not good enough for that girl. I'm not good enough for God. I'm never going to succeed. Right? Satan takes us on this whole spin cycle. How have you dealt with it?
That's a great question.
And I also don't want to think like sometimes we talk in terms of healed, assuming wherever you're at is fine. But, how have you dealt with it to this point?
Yeah, leading up to when my addiction started getting worse, I wouldn't ever show. I had what you would call, good boy syndrome. I would only portray my best image to whenever I could, and I would hide everything else. And the problem with that is, while yes, you might appear great with other people, inwardly you're hating it. Because there's a dissonance, there's a disconnect between who you are and who you're trying to portray yourself to be. And it really took a moment of me just deciding, am I going to be genuine, and am I going to be a real person? Am I going to actually share my thoughts with Kelce, share my actions with Kelce, even if I know the reaction is going to be negative, or if I fear it's going to be negative? Because I would minimalize my mistakes, and I would try to hide or not talk about things that were vulnerable or hard to talk about, because I'm like, that's a risk. And I would calculate whatever I was doing, whatever I was saying, to based on what would be the least amount of risk so that I can predict the result.
Wow.
And that happens with addicts. I can't tell you how many times there's a beautiful song that talks about, I got a taste for poison. I've given up on ever being well. I keep mining the horizon, looking for excuses yet to tell. And it's just, that's what I was doing. I was constantly developing stories or ways to minimalize my behavior, ways to justify it, ways to hide it, push it aside. And it wasn't until 2 years ago, I would say on our D-Day, that it was the first time I'd ever really opened up fully and fully expected her to reject me and get divorced, and there was acceptance.
So tell us about that. It sounds like you're getting at, there was a point in your relationship where you did start to communicate, and it all kind of came out. You called it D-Day? Is that what you said?
The disclosure day.
Okay.
Discovery Day.
I like that. I actually
Day.
Funny enough, I've never heard of it called D-Day. I like that.
Multiple contexts, because for me, I was considering it divorce day. So
sure.
To add to the story, the birth of my first son, I was back into addiction, and this is where I was doing it frequently, and I knew I was addicted. And it was like
this is engaging in pornography?
Yes, engaging in pornography. I was addicted. I was watching it often, every day. Okay. I'd go a couple days sometimes without. And then what happened is, we moved in. We now had second pregnancy, and now my daughter's coming. And I remember the stress of that. And this was leading into, right before COVID. And so there's a lot of work stress. And I was on a work trip, and my back had been hurting and had been stressing about it. And I decided, okay, I'm going to go get a massage. And it was like 9:30 at night. So of course I went to a place that was not, a typical massage parlor. And I didn't get anything done. I can tell that the opportunity was there, But then I came home from that work trip, and that thought consumed me, that these places exist. And that's when the addiction moved from just simply viewing pornography to now I was seeking out ways to act out. And I tried to hold back for a little bit, but I would go visit them just to be like, I'm curious, is this one of those places that does it? And I'd visit, and then I can tell pretty quickly if it was. And it was almost like I'm an adrenaline junkie. I love extreme sports and anything that brings adrenaline. And it became almost like a sport because I was gambling against myself on whether or not I would resist. But the problem with that gamble is eventually you're going to lose.
Right.
And that's the first time I got an illicit massage. And it happened, over the course of a year, several times. And that's when I knew I was no longer, this wasn't pornography, this was something much greater. And I would lie to myself and say, this isn't infidelity because I'm not having sex. But it was. That was essentially cheating. And I got to the point where in back of my mind, I knew I'm going to have to come clean. I knew judgment day was coming. I knew my reckoning. But I didn't want to approach it because I liked being married to my wife. I loved my kids. And I was not ready to give that up. It wasn't until we started doing things as a couple and as a family that were more God-centric. We started studying the scriptures together. We started watching The Chosen. And I knew at that point that I started moving forward that this is something I need to do, not just for me, but I was fully ready at that point saying I need to no longer be like this for Kelce. She needs a better life and she deserves better than me. I had a friend that was going through pornography addiction at the same time too, and he got a divorce because his wife discovered it.
Wow.
And I watched that marriage kind of fall apart, but then I spent a lot of time with him over that year. And he spent time with his kids and started recovering. And that's the first time I had that thought, if I get divorced, my life won't end. And I can no longer do this to Kelce. She deserves so much better than me. And so it took a little bit, I'd say a couple months of me planning, preparing, but eventually on my birthday, November 17th, we were planning to go out to eat, and I, kind of was crying, and she kind of comes in, she says, is everything okay? And I break down, I'm like, no. And then I just threw it all up on her and let her deal with that mess. And I even told her, here's the number of a lawyer that I know for when you want to divorce me. And I was fully expecting to be divorced that day.
So Kelce, that's a lot to get heaped on you at a time. At one time, can you walk us through what your experience was like as he talked to you about these things, and even to the extent that he's saying like, hey, here's a lawyer, he was so sure you were going to get divorced. What was going through your head?
Yeah, it was really just a scary night. Like he said, it was on his birthday, and I had no idea that it was coming. It was a full-on atomic bomb. We had just spent the night we went out for his birthday. We went, I think, to the Nickelcade. Our kids were really young and thought that would be fun. We had so much fun as a family, put the kids to bed, and then he dropped this bomb on me. And at first I felt just this anxiety and panic, but then it was crazy how I just felt this warm embrace just envelop me. It was crazy.
The same night.
Wow. It was, I can't explain it. It was clearly like the arms of my Savior he just wrapped himself all around me and said, it's going to be okay. Was I still angry at Ryan? Oh, of course I was. But I have never felt so much peace in a time that I should not have felt peace. And it was so bizarre. And yeah, I know other women who have divorced their husbands over addictions for pornography and other reasons. But I didn't have that desire in my heart because as part of my church, we're given a special blessing. And in my blessing, it told me that I could choose who I could marry, but that God would prepare a righteous man for me. And I stuck by my decision of Ryan was that righteous man for me, and that he was once that righteous man, and that he could continue and become that righteous man again.
Wow.
God is good.
He is.
So how did you have the courage to do that? I mean, what? Because that's not common,
No,
especially
it's
that
not.
early. Like, what was different in your case?
Honestly, I don't know. I was dying inside myself for a few days, and I happened to work very closely with our church leader and had a meeting already actually scheduled to meet with him on Sunday at our church, and told him like what had kind of happened. He introduced me to a program of where I could go. It happened right around Thanksgiving, and so I was led to this program in a nearby town, went and met with some women who were in the same situation that I was, because I felt like I just needed to be surrounded by other women who understood what I was going through. I just felt shame and didn't feel like I could turn to anyone I knew, because it was like, oh my gosh, there's this black spot on, in our marriage. Like, it was just this big stain. And like, you don't hang your dirty laundry out for people to see, right? That's kind of how I looked at it. And I went to that class, and then it was just amazing to see how God's hand was in our marriage. There was another woman there, I remember, who mentioned that that wasn't her typical class she went to. She went to one that was closer to my hometown. And for some reason, that stuck in my mind. And so I had told Ryan that if we're going to work through this, we're going to start going to that class. And that's actually where we ended up meeting his sponsor, who has helped both of us just immensely, both he and his wife.
So what class is that?
It's the addiction recovery program through the
Okay.
Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
It's
That's
one
great.
specific for couples where you go together rather than separate.
Wow.
Okay. Great. Okay. Good resource, folks.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
that wasn't
been
the
a good
only
resource for you guys.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So for those listening who are like, hey, so we've tried a couple different things, maybe haven't heard of this before, like what's been helpful about that experience that maybe is different than other things?
I don't know. For me, it's great because there's two different like manuals, if you will, and principles that you target each week. And there are principles that are for the addict, and then there's a manual that are principles for the support person, so like myself. And it's just great to go through both sides, and it's great to have the addict and the support person there, because then we both get to see each side of what we both need to work on.
Very cool.
And I mean, in addition to that, I did another group class that was very much more specific towards addiction.
Okay.
And, helping you understand how the brain is developing and your cognitive distortions that, and the thinking barriers that addicts commonly use. And it was funny because we look and evaluated at different, recovery programs across this, our area in our state. And we were debating between two. And there's one, and the therapist that led it, she was a drill sergeant. She did not, when I first met with her, I thought she hated men. And I was like, I do not want to go to this person. She, I would answer something and she would just laugh and scoff, kind of joking at me. And I didn't realize what she was doing, but she realized when I wasn't being genuine. And then we did this other one that was much more warm and accepting. And I see people that can benefit from both programs, but the one that I needed that drill sergeant. And so I went to this 12-step group program where for 12 weeks we went through all the different things and practiced honesty and talked about all the ways that thinking distortions that I'm, using to constantly justify my addiction and different coping mechanisms for those. And so that we did in tandem to the class. And, really that's why recovery is so beautiful, is there isn't one way, but there are so many different ways to do it. And it's simple in the terms that you don't need a PhD. You
Right.
don't need, to go to a master's class in order to understand addiction. The really getting in recovery is simple. It's just very hard to do.
Yeah. Wow. So it sounds like, God kind of showed up with the right thing at the right time and helped you with what you needed, which for you in your case, right? Everybody has a different vehicle, but what you needed at the time, Ryan, what I'm hearing is it was like, I need someone to help me walk through the justifications that I'm making to get into this mess. And that fits with what you were talking about earlier. How have you guys been able to navigate this as you've gotten further into recovery, and just catch us up to speed as to where you guys are right now with things?
I mean, we talked earlier about how in my family I grew up, we didn't talk about things.
Yeah.
So I always saw this addiction as simply an action problem. I didn't realize addiction was all stems from mismanaged emotions,
Yeah.
stress,
Yeah.
things that you are vulnerable. Then thoughts follow that. And if you try to change the way you think without ever trying to address your emotions, it's not going to last. And so for me, I needed to finally get to the place where I can learn how to recognize when my emotions are out of line, recognize when I need to address them, how to manage them, and then recognize when my brain's trying to trick itself to do something that is not healthy for me. And that became a huge factor because when you live for so long in your life thinking one way, your brain develops very thick tracks on continuously going back to that same method. And getting out of that took effort. And it took someone kind of cracking a whip saying, stop doing this, stop presenting yourself in a superior image, stop doing that, stop using victim mindset. And all these things that I didn't realize I was using because I never want to address why I'm doing that. And that was because of feelings of inadequacy, feelings of shame, and boredom. And not boredom as in I had nothing to do. Boredom in the terms of I always felt I wasn't ever living up to my potential. I think that's a great definition of boredom, is you're not doing something to your potential. And I was experiencing that a lot and didn't realize it.
Did you have any thoughts on that process, Kelce?
Yeah, over the course of Ryan's intensive 12-week program, it really was awesome to see him evolve. It was and kind of be reborn. So yeah, it was just amazing to see his growth. And I was fortunate enough to meet with the therapist who ran his course on the side just individually. So she could kind of give me reports of how she thought he was doing, which was very helpful. So
What did that mean for you as a wife? I mean, I assume there's some meaning in that, if that was powerful for you.
yeah, it was. And I feel like it was beneficial for me too, because I feel like in our marriage, I was always kind of just accepting of what Ryan did and never was one to hold him accountable, or didn't help him own up to some of his obligations, I guess. And she helped me to just learn that it's okay to let him take care of me. I don't need to I don't need a man to take care of me. I kind of had that attitude of I can stand on my own 2 feet, but changing my mindset with some things too, to just help him feel more desired and just creating a stronger relationship in our marriage.
So you created more actual intimacy in your relationship.
We did. And we actually found out that we had more problems with our intimacy than we realized. So, yeah.
What's more vulnerable than sex? And we never talked about it.
Yeah.
And we didn't realize that not talking about things that are hard, like intimacy, was kind of this perpetuating cycle, because I would get frustrated, and then I'd, hold on to those emotions. And then sure enough, later on, I'd have urges, and it's weird when you become addicted to something long enough, especially like pornography, the joy goes out of it. And I even started seeing it more as a chore. It's almost like it's snowing. And it's gotta go shovel the snow on the driveway. When I get those urges, that's how I felt it. I'm like, okay, I know what I have to do. I have to quickly get rid of this and then go back to my life. And I didn't realize why that kept coming back. And no, I think the biggest lesson I've had is when it comes to recovery, it's not just like a surgery where you can go in and remove it and then go back to normal life. Recovery is deciding to change the way you live so that you can manage it.
Wow.
And
Recovery is a lifestyle change.
it's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And we changed a lot about our lives
Yeah, we
to
did.
make ourselves so that we're more vulnerable with each other, and we're talking and we're closer, and we prioritize what needs to be prioritized.
Ryan, what are some of the tools that you've learned and some skills to help you manage and process emotion differently than you used to?
Well, the first and foremost is talking about it. It's so dumb how simple it is that simply talking about your emotions takes the power away from it. It's so, it's one of those cliche phrases like take one day, or when you recover, you hear the phrase, live one day at a time. And I thought those are too cliche and naive, but you start talking about your emotions. I tell Kelce, hey, Kelce, I'm frustrated and I don't know why. And I know it's not justified and it has nothing to do with this. And we would talk for, 10, 15 minutes, and that those feelings that usually would start bottling up and circling around, they just dissipate. And so that was a big one. And then there's a lot of other tools in recovery, but I think that was one of the biggest ones in our marriage.
Yeah.
What's that been like on your end, Kelce? I'm sure there's things that have come up for you that are quite difficult. Sometimes we ignore the woman.
Yeah.
How has that been helpful in your relationship to be able to talk to Ryan about what you're going through?
I think it's great because it just gives us more opportunities to be vulnerable with each other, which we never did before all of his addiction came out. So just having more opportunities to be vulnerable with each other and to just express our emotions. And we're actually not afraid to express our emotions to a degree, like in front of our kids too, because we want to show them that it's healthy and it's okay to have emotions and to talk about them.
Yeah. So I guess just one quick tip then as a coupleship. You talked about, not only did I learn how to manage some emotions, we picked up some things to create deeper intimacy with one another and healthy communication. Maybe one or two, just like, what are kind of those top things that have really been effective for you too?
Well, one thing that I used to always see other couples do, and it seems like so simple, but Ryan, he just gets really dedicated at work, but he would never text me during the day, or he'd never message me. And I would always think why doesn't he want to talk to me? We're married. But having him just send me a couple messages at work, that's actually helped. And I know that sounds like a duh answer, but it really has changed a lot in our marriage. And then also just taking time, every night at the end of the night to just put away all the screens and to just sit and talk face to face with each other without any distractions. I would say those are my two biggest things that have helped me.
Wow.
On my end, if you're struggling with addiction, you have to decide to be all in. Because for 15, 20 years of my life, I would say I wasn't addicted. Then finally, when I started admitting it, I would do just half efforts to recover. And it wasn't until I made the decision that I don't care about the consequences of what happens, I will still do it. And that was, I know I don't want to be divorced, but I can no longer keep acting in a way that is unfair. And I accepted that if I'm going to recover, I have to be accountable and ready to accept any consequences that come. And even from then, that D-Day it's odd because for Kelce, it was hard for her. But for me, there's something so freeing about confessing.
Yeah.
But then I then had that realization and that fear that what if it comes back? And that fear is just based on I haven't built enough trust in myself that I can overcome this.
Yeah.
And I just need to be all in and choose every day to put that as my first and foremost thing that I'm going to do. Is I live that way, what is that phrase? Live one day at a time. I hated it, but now I understand it. It's just, what do I need to do today to not suffer with my addiction? What do I need to do this hour? What do I need to do this minute? And that's the mindset. It's just one day at a time. It's really, what am I needing to do right now? Don't worry about the future. What I need to do today, and prioritizing that to be all in.
Wow. Kelce, we kind of got Ryan's final thoughts. I'd love to hear, just as we're closing up, what would you kind of express? What sentiments have come to you as we've talked about this, and what would you have to say as we wrap up about your experience and your story?
For my story, I just consider myself very lucky because I married a man who had the desire to change. I know that there are many women out there whose hearts are breaking because they have married men who choose not to change. But I just want to say, don't give up hope. I knew about Ryan's pornography addiction for many, many years, and that change did eventually come. So I'm just grateful for God helping Ryan see that he needed to change, and for Ryan accepting God's will to make that change so that we could continue our marriage together and keep our family together.
Wow. Guys, thanks for coming on today. We appreciate the vulnerability. Love hearing your story. Do you have a song that encapsulates your recovery?
Actually, on my drive to our disclosure with our therapist during his 12-week program.
Happened on our anniversary.
It happened on our 10-year anniversary, actually. We had our disclosure on our 10-year anniversary. And on the drive there, I've kind of joked that God speaks to me through my music. And as I was driving there, he played the song Maybe It's Okay by We Are Messengers.
Wow. Maybe it's okay. By we, you say we are messengers.
We are messengers. And
Okay.
yeah. So
Well, guys, thanks for being on with us. Appreciate you. For those of you listening, head to our website, unashamedunafraid.com. Donate, become an outsider. Follow us on social media at Unashamed Unafraid. Like us, rate us, follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And here is We Are Messengers.
If I didn't know what it hurt like to be broken, then how would I know what it feels like to be whole? If I didn't know what it cuts like to be rejected, then I wouldn't know the joy of coming home. Maybe it's okay if I'm not okay, 'cause the one who holds the world is holding on to me. Maybe it's alright if I'm not alright, 'cause the one who holds the stars is holding my whole life. If I didn't know what it looked like to be dirty, then I wouldn't know what it feels like to be clean. And if all of my shame hadn't drove me to hide in the shadows, then I wouldn't know the beauty of being free. Let your will be done here in my heart as in heaven. Father, let your kingdom come. Let your will be done here in my heart as in heaven. Oh, maybe it's okay if I'm not okay. Okay if I'm not okay.